Well, hello, good morning, and welcome to episode 3 of the OWL Service, ACM Training's weekly webinar. And what a special program this is. This is the global, don't accuse me of hyperbole, this is the global launch of Dress Up Friday. Dress Up Friday, I guess it's a fairly self-explanatory campaign that we're launching in a humble way right here, right now, in our home office near Ludlow in Shropshire. We're very used to going to work smartly when we were going to our usual places of work, and it made sense, therefore, on a Friday to dress down. But now many of us are working from our home offices, and we're pretty scruffy Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. In fact, I think at the last count, I'd worn the same T-shirt 3 days in a row until yesterday, when the smell set my mind racing, and I thought, you know, Dress Up Friday and a trip to the washing machine might be the go. So Dress Up Friday is the antidote to being scruffy every other day of the week. This is our campaign to get the world sartorially splendid every Friday for the duration of COVID-19, and to inject a little bit of happiness into what otherwise would be fairly bleak lives. And already, even though it's had a very modest launch on the social web, people are sending their pictures using the hashtag Dress Up Friday, and thank you for that. As the day progresses, you know, if you haven't dressed up yet, dress up, take a snap of yourself, post it to social using that hashtag Dress Up Friday, and we'll see if we can't create something big. It's a bit of an experiment to some extent. It may fall completely flat on its face. But one of the things we do here at ACM Training is social media training, and I'm always encouraging my trainees to think creatively about how they can create a buzz for their own organizations. And this will either be a lesson to myself not to try such racy things, or hey, it might work. And I've got to put my money where my mouth is, or my clothes where my mouth is. And you'll see that I'm wearing, you know, a tuxedo that I think I had years ago to pick up some gong that I'd been awarded in the old days of working in television. I don't think it was first place. It was probably a runner-up or a nominated prize more than anything. And I've got a rather natty waistcoat that I have to thank Carmel Girling for when she was working for the museum service and the art gallery, I think, in Birmingham. And this rather natty waistcoat was used to publicise the fact that there was a Canaletto exhibition on in Birmingham, and I've been wearing it on and off ever since. So if you're watching right now, Carmel, thank you. You've got your money's worth out of that publicity stunt. And incidentally, if anybody does know how to tie a bow tie, what I realized when I got up at 5:30 this morning was I have absolutely no idea how to do it. And the how-to videos aren't much good, because you've got to put the how-to video in the mirror in order to have your hands around the right way. And perhaps a clip-on one might have been a far better way of doing things. So good morning. Incidentally, those of you who are taking part in the live chat here, good morning, Richard, looking good, says one person. Eva says good morning, and good morning to you all too. As I've said in the previous 2 episodes, the OWL Service is your webinar, and we're encouraging you to ask us the questions that you'd like us to attempt to answer. If we can't answer them, we'll try and find somebody who can, and the questions might be around training and professional development. That's our expertise as a training company. But of course, everyone's expertise is limited, and we're happy to seek answers to questions elsewhere if we can't answer them. So the webinar is dynamic, it's changing. And if you do have a question and you want it to go in a particular direction, a suggestion perhaps rather than a question, well, then you need to email asktheowls@acmtraining.co.uk. asktheowls@acmtraining.co.uk. And that's exactly what somebody called Eva did. And she has asked whether I might offer a critique of the government's response to COVID-19 from a crisis comms perspective thus far. And I should say before I answer the question that the things I'm about to say could be applied to any organization. They're not a criticism of the government particularly. I'll leave criticisms of the government's response until afterwards, and to leave it to people who are far better qualified than I am to know about these things, to leave it to opposition parties, to other politicians, for example. But I think there are nonetheless one or two things that have happened or haven't happened so far that are instructive for anyone who may have to be thinking of organizational crisis comms in hopefully not as big a crisis as the one that confronts governments around the world right now because of the coronavirus pandemic. And I'm going to limit myself just to three observations. And the first one is around what I call tell and show. Many people will be familiar from school days, perhaps their kids' school days, with show and tell. Well, we turn that on its head at ACM training, and we talk about tell and show. And I was reminded of this point by a colleague of mine, Carl Baldacchino, who worked many years ago for West Mercia Police when I first came in touch with him, and has since worked in lots of different places at the National Policing College, for example, and most recently at Balfour Beatty Living Places in Hereford. And he was crying out loud that the government's tell, its message at the early point of the coronavirus pandemic, was don't panic buy, don't panic. Don't panic was the tell. The show, however, was very different. The show was of empty supermarket shelves, devoid of bread and of especially toilet paper for some bizarre reason. And when there is a mismatch between what people are being told, what they're hearing with their ears, and what they're seeing with their eyes, you're asking for trouble. If you think about it, we are visual creatures. We take our primary cues from what we see. And we tend to, the saying, I'll only believe it if I see it. So you might have a really, really good message around don't panic. But if the pictures are saying panic, well, then people will panic. So it's important, if you're trying to manage a crisis in an organization, to, insofar as you can, make sure that the tell and the show are both going in the same direction. The second point I want to make is around the saying, actions speak louder than words. And I accept fully that in something as complex and as global as coronavirus, the words, of course, have to be ahead of the action. And no one is at this stage quite sure where the pandemic is going. It's very different to what I might call fast burn disasters, where it's all over and done with by the time that the crisis comms team start talking to stakeholders, start talking to the public. Certain things are known. In this one, there are those Rumsfeldian unknown unknowns, if you like, that are ready to bite us on the backside, perhaps unexpectedly. But nonetheless, there is a danger that if there is a too big a lag between your words, let's say, for example, talking about 100,000 tests by the end of April, and the actions not eventuating at the end of April, well, then one's credibility as a spokesperson tends to drop. People believe you less. Your key messages become harder to communicate because you're lacking a little integrity. And of course, we're talking about marginal gains and reductions here, but you want to be as compelling a spokesperson for your organization as possible, and you don't want to undermine your position, your credibility, by stretching people's credulity to breaking point by having too big a lag, as I say, between the actions that you take as an organization and the words that you speak. Because again, a bit like show and tell, people believe what they see with their own eyes. People are more likely to believe the actions that you take than the words that you speak. And the final point, Eva, on crisis comms is around the terminology that we use. And right at the start of the pandemic, when we were still calling it coronavirus rather than COVID-19, I was talking to a health visitor in London whose job it was to do some of the earlier tests. And she said to me, look, the government's got the language completely wrong here. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, no one in the communities I serve understands what social distancing means or what self-isolation is. We as medics might understand them. She said, well, just go home, stay home would be a better message. The concept of home is much easier, and going home is much easier to comprehend across the spectrum, irrespective of what community you're from, than social distancing and self-isolation. And I guess the lesson for all of us here in Crisis Comms is that right at the start, and it's hard, I accept, it's important to consider very carefully the language that you're going to use, because quite quickly that language will, if you like, cement itself into the national consciousness, as social distancing and self-isolation did initially. And when something is solidified, when something has been cemented in people's minds, it's quite difficult to get rid of, although not impossible. And I notice just in the recent few days that the messaging has been much clearer on the podiums at the day in language that I think everybody can understand. So Eva, I hope that answers your question, and I hope nobody sees that as a particular criticism of the government. I'm trying to keep politics out of this insofar as I can, but I do think that in years to come, certainly people like me, clever academics, certainly not like me, I'm not an academic, but those who study these things for a living will find an awful lot of detail to pore over in organizational response to COVID-19. So Eva, I can see that the messaging has changed over time. Maybe that also means we're learning as we go. Yeah, learning is good. That's important. ACM training certainly believes in learning in terms of our crisis comms. Good point, Eva. And thanks for answering. Well, that's my job here during the OWL service. We are, my colleague and I, at your service. So if you've got questions, as Eva did, please send them in. You know the email address by now, asktheowls at acmtraining.co.uk. The next bit of the webinar is pre-recorded because it was difficult to get hold of the next two guests live, or perhaps they were just a little bit frit of doing this live stuff. And the first person you're going to hear from is a clinical psychologist. So, hey, it's getting heavy, isn't it? From that jolly start of Dress Up Friday, a clinical psychologist. Her name is Dr. Penny Priest, and I was talking to her expecting the story to be, once a hack, always a hack, expecting the story to be that people were beating a path to her door in great numbers to seek her help from a mental health perspective, that somehow coronavirus COVID-19 was going to make us all mad. And actually, perhaps counterintuitively for me at least, she said that wasn't the case. So I'm going to play you her interview, and straight off the back of that, if the head stuff does your head in, so to speak, we've got a fun little section at the end of the webinar. I will come back and say goodbye from a health and fitness expert who is going to give us some advice on how not to be completely ground down physically by working from home, hunched over our desks. But first up, Dr. Penny Priest.
Actually, what I'm noticing is that people are just getting on with stuff like everyone else is. And if anything, this situation isn't, it depends on the person, but for quite a few people, their existing psychological difficulties are the main thing for them, actually.
There's not another layer of anxiety on top. They're already, if you like, forgive me for finding the wrong word here, probably they're already troubled, and an extra trouble on top of their original burden doesn't actually make that much difference.
Yeah, I think, definitely that is the case for some of the people that I'm working with, for sure. It's almost disconcerting that, I'm having my first contact with someone since this situation's arisen, and I'm kind of almost expecting an outpouring of, wow, this is really difficult, but they're sort of taking me back towards what we were talking about. So it's, the situation currently is not necessarily the thing that's most on their mind, but that's not everyone, so that's some people. Other people are really struggling with it and being forced into different situations that they wouldn't have been in. So for example, somebody maybe living with a parent when they weren't living with them before, as an adult, it's quite difficult living with people, I think. And so if you're suddenly faced with living with somebody or sharing a space with somebody that you weren't beforehand, lots of people working from home, I think about all the families and the children. So I think that kind of thing is making things quite difficult for a lot of people.
That being the case, Penny, is there something that you can suggest? Are there any things that we can all do? Whether it's just modest stresses we have in our lives, or whether they're more significant stresses, to kind of cope with that, to alleviate those stresses, to be more robust in ourselves, to avoid having to beat a path to the door of a clinical psychologist to seek, some kind of professional help.
I think it's difficult to give sort of global advice, because as a psychologist, I'd recognise we're all individual, we're all unique. But that said, I think it's really important for people to kind of try and work out what they generally do to cope, what sorts of things they've normally done in difficult situations. And so that's for any of us, but also for people that, have got existing psychological difficulties. And trying to do more of those things, trying to work out what those things are and do more of those. But some of that, so if you're a routine person, for example, I think it would be about deciding what sort of daily routine you're going to have. But if you're not a routine person, and I am a routine person, so it's easier for me to think along those lines. But if you're not, maybe it's about trying to allow for sort of spontaneity and work out how you can, be more spontaneous than this is forcing you to be.
I guess what you're saying then is that we've got to know ourselves well enough to know what kind of escape mechanisms, what kind of pressure relief valves work. I think I don't like the routine. I like the unstructured stuff.
Oh, really?
I'm getting a bit stressed by the routine of being in this little home office, every day of the week, and not being able to go much sort of further than the end of the garden. But
what don't you like about the routine then?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm in the psychiatrist's chair or the psychologist's chair right now. What don't I like about the routine? It seems to get stale quite quickly for me, the routine, and I just wonder whether a break from that routine, throwing open the windows, climbing out and going for a cycle ride in my case, and I know your case as well as a keen cyclist, is something that we kind of need to do.
So you're looking for new things then?
Yeah. I think
you were talking about this crisis also being an opportunity in terms of feeling really enthused by the possibilities. And so there's lots of potential for new stuff here for you, isn't there?
I guess it's knowing oneself well enough to know what best works for you in your circumstances. So for those who are working from home, who are fretting that their normal routine has been ripped to shreds, imposing a little bit of routine on their home working life as quickly as they can. And for those at the other end of the spectrum, people like me, making sure that they don't get ground down by the routine of walking, 5 yards across the garden from the back door to the home office, and actually kick off, their shoes and run around on the lawn in an unstructured way for 10 minutes every lunchtime.
I think there's a lot of space here for creativity if that's the sort of person that you are, and thinking about all these things that you might be able to do with some of this time. But that is also another issue. I think there's been a lot of talk about how we can all slow down and we've got more time, and I'm not finding that at all. I've been busier than ever and getting a chance to ride the bike. I mean, it feels really difficult, but that's fine because I am a routine person, and when my routine is put out, I just very quickly develop another one, and that's my way of kind of feeling a bit more secure and in control, but everyone's different. They're not always looking for that.
The time point is an interesting one because, of course, it's always been the case that we've had rich or poor 24 hours a day, and it's how we choose to use those 24 hours that we're all given. And I guess those who use those hours wisely do well in life. It's a bit of a sweeping generalization, and those who fritter away the 24 hours that we've all got kind of tend to do less well in life. And perhaps, again, what this offers is an opportunity to save a bit of time that we would be using to do something else. Commuting, for example, an awful lot of people are finding that they've got 3 hours a day extra because they're not sitting on a train or in a tube or on a bus or something like that. And using that time to establish a new routine, if that's what they like, or to do something completely different that they've never done before, if they're not routine lovers.
Yeah, and I think what you say there about something completely different, I think that's a key point about difference. I think that's what probably a lot of people are craving at the moment, because we've not got enough difference. We're not really going down the road and seeing people, and we are in the same environment. So there's something about needing to create difference within the spaces that we're currently in. And, how do we go about that?
Back to that time thing, some people, I guess, will fret because they are running out of time. And does that come back to having some kind of routine and recognizing that you shouldn't fritter away the time that you've saved on one thing, that you should get up and use it?
Maybe if people are feeling challenged by the time element, feeling like they've not got enough time, one response to that is often sort of just becoming even more active and trying to do even more to try, sort of chasing your tail kind of thing. But I guess that might even be a cue for people to, and I know it's oversold really, but to take some time out and spend some time doing mindful breathing, practicing some mindfulness and just noticing what's going on, and noticing thereafter that the world didn't sort of fall apart because you spent half an hour doing some mindful breathing when you could have been having half an hour being really productive.
I like the idea of making friends with kind of quiet contemplation, and making friends with idleness is a good thing rather than a bad thing. That the word idle is pejorative, isn't it? Most often it's seen as a pejorative, but it actually doesn't need to be. We're still, we're silent, we're acknowledging our own existence, taking deep breaths and listening to the inhalation and the exhalation, and calming ourselves in troubled times as a consequence.
And maybe it's about getting a balance. So if you are an idle sort of person, maybe being more active. And if you're a busy sort of person, maybe being more idle, just getting more of a balance. I mean, I guess one thing about this is that we all are going to be doing a little bit more self-reflection, I would have thought, because we're just kind of forced into this situation where we're kind of looking more at ourselves and our immediate surroundings, and so it's going to force us maybe to notice some things about ourselves that we'd not noticed before.
Could it be the case then that putting aside all of the sort of the medical consequences and the obvious consequences of coronavirus, that we might emerge from it? Here I am, eternal optimist, clutching at straws, looking for the silver lining and so on, but we might come out of it as better people as a consequence. I mean, could you go that far, or is it again a sweeping journalistic generalization that one should avoid?
Well, who knows? It's difficult to say, and there's going to be so much that comes out of this that we're all going to be talking about and writing about for the rest of our lives, and people that aren't even born yet are going to be reflecting on this, I think.
And that in itself is quite alarming, isn't it? That we might have just 3 or 4 weeks ago had a kind of life plan, retirement or whatever it happens to be, spending more time with grandchildren and so on. And that plan has been ripped asunder. It's been pulled from under us, and our lives won't be the same again. They will be following a different path over which we, for the time being at least, have very little control. And I think a lot of people are kind of grappling with that, the loss, if you like, and the mourning that comes after a loss, the grief, if you like, that comes after a loss, that plan simply can't happen anymore.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess, yeah, you were saying about, might we come out of this better people, and we may do, who knows. But I guess one of my hopes is that we might come out of this as better communities, and that there might be much bigger sort of global decisions and questions that come out of this, things that, you know, people would not have paid attention to before. And just for example, that it feels like now perhaps you know, more people are going to be much more aware of the role of paid carers in our society, for example, and maybe hadn't even thought about that, but being much more exposed to hearing about the sorts of work that they do and the essential nature of that work. And, you know, so I'm kind of hoping that lots of eyes will be open to things like that. And so even if we don't change radically as individuals, that some of this we hold on to as communities and societies to then move in different directions that are going to be more helpful for lots more people.
Clinical psychologist Dr. Penny Priest. And at this point, I'm going to press a button and cut to the wide shot. And there you see a rather hunched Richard Urridge, hunched over his computer console with the weight of the world bearing down on his shoulders. And if Penny has been helping us with our mental health and well-being, let's look at our physical health and well-being right now. As hard as it is to believe, I have a personal trainer. I know I'm not his star pupil. I'm not a terribly good advert for his business, Pulse Health and Fitness in Ludlow, in Shropshire, but I'm pleased to say nonetheless that he joins us now. Andy, sorry to ruin your business by showing such a kind of fine figure of a man, but can you give us some advice on how, you know, when we are sitting at a desk, perhaps a little bit more tense than normal, with, as I say, the weight of the world bearing down on us, how we can free that pressure up, and even if we're not kind of gym buddies and bunnies and dressed in stretch lycra, how we can just keep fit and strong.
Good morning, Richard. I would call you a work in progress. So I like a challenge. So don't worry about that. Yeah, I think now more so than ever before, people are having to work at home in probably makeshift desks, makeshift chairs. They haven't got the ergonomic chairs that they've got in their offices at work. So I think it's really important that people, if they do spend 8 hours or 6 hours, do think about how they're sitting, because after 8 hours being in one position, that isn't going to do anybody any good, no matter how fit or how flexible or how mobile you are. I think with posture, there's a bit of a misnomer that there's a perfect posture. And I don't really think when you're sitting that there is, because if you think about being in a perfect posture for 8 hours with your shoulders back, your back straight, your rib cage tucked under, that is still going to ache. It's still going to make muscles get tired, whether they be the lumbar, which is the lower back. So I think the main thing to think about is movement. So I think even if you're sitting for an hour or half an hour, move position, move to another position. As long as that position isn't compromising and causing pain, I think, you know, when people used to say, oh, you're really fidgety, I don't actually think there's anything wrong with fidgety, because what it does is it changes different muscles being used. So if you're sitting at a desk and you're writing whatever for 8 hours, to stay in the same position is really, really difficult, and it's going to make those muscles ache a lot more. So there's a couple of things I could think about doing straight away. You can actually put in prompters on your screen, on your computer screen, that could flash up, say, every half hour and tell you to stand up, move around, pull the shoulders back. If you can't work those prompters, then maybe even post-it notes on the side of your computer to say 10:30 walk, 10:30 stretch, or even when you get up for a coffee or a tea or for a toilet break. Use those times. Try to build in a regular pattern of actually moving, because it's so easy for all of us to develop this stoop position and stay there. Now, whilst that stoop position for half an hour probably isn't going to do you any harm, think about after half an hour changing to an upright, just to give the different muscles a chance to relax, different muscles a chance to work. So that's a little tip. But alongside that, there are a couple of stretches we can do. We can even do them sitting down. I would suggest maybe that you do stand up to do them, just because you're going to be stretching your hip flexors, maybe work a little bit of a backside muscle. So there's a couple of muscles that we want to aim for, really. And one of the predominant ones is this here muscle going from your front shoulder into your chest muscle. That's the one that does suffer with tightness a lot, I'm seeing with clients who do have desk jobs. The other one is the reverse, which is the ones in the back, because they're the ones that are being overstretched. So a couple of good exercises, just really, really quickly. One of my favourite is, if I'm sitting down, is to interlink my fingers, place them over the back of my neck, not too high up on the head, just in the nape of the neck. And then what we do is, if I'm sitting down, I just tuck my chin. So think of a double chin, tuck under, and then what I do is it's like I'm trying to hide. So I'm closing the elbows. And then from there, this is the bit that works, is I open up right the way back. Now, the effort is coming from my shoulders. It's not the elbows trying to get back as far as they can. It's the shoulders that are opening the movement. So what I'm doing is I'm working in this part of the body, okay? That's the really important bit. So fingers together behind the nape of the neck, and then just hide everything with the elbows, and then all of a sudden lift yourself up, but use the shoulders to take everything back, and you'll get a nice good stretch. So you could probably do maybe 10 of those, build it up, but set your prompter, do them every half an hour or so. Another one which I find is a really good one when you're sitting down is a scapular movement. So your scapula is your shoulder blade on the back there, and I call these scapular clocks. So the way to imagine is, if you were upright sitting on your chair, what I want you to do is bring the scapula up. So you're basically bringing the shoulders up to your ear, and then what we're doing is we're imagining a clock going backwards from 12 to 6 o'clock. So we go from 6 o'clock straight up the clock to 12, and then we go right the way around, back down to 6. So we come up and we come down. We can do about 12, 15 of those. And then what we do is we go from 12 o'clock, so we're at the top, and we go round the opposite way, which is clockwise, to 6. Then we come up 6 to 12, and we go the opposite way. So we've gone from the bottom to the top on the first set of 12, done that, and then we go from the top to the bottom, come back up, top to the bottom, come back up. They're called scapular clocks. So that's another one you can actually do sitting down, and it just frees that scapula up, because that's going to get really strained if you're sitting in a hunch position for quite a number of hours. So with those two exercises, we're just working opposites, and we're just getting them to be freed up. If you do want to do another one, this is a nice one as well. We just stick our arms out to the side, and all I'm doing basically is I'm bringing my scapula, which again is the shoulder blade at the back, I'm bringing it up, so my palms are turning round so they face behind me, and then I'm taking it back down so my palms face up towards the ceiling. So my scapula's coming up and round, and it's going back down again, and up and round, and it's going back down again. So again, that's another one you can do. If you want to challenge yourself a bit more on that one, we could do alternate. So we have the palm up on one side, palm down on the other side, and we alternate. So the scapula is coming up on my right, down on my left, up on my left, down on my right. And that's another nice one to do in the chair. So that's 3 exercises you can do like I say, set a prompter on your screen. Use some post-it notes if you can, if you can't set the prompter up. But the important thing is to fidget. So when your mother or your father used to tell you to stop fidgeting, you're actually wrong. You should be fidgeting because it will stop those muscles getting used to being stuck in one position. So hopefully...
What do you reckon? Here we are. I'm doing it now. You said I wasn't your star pupil, or I said I wasn't your star pupil. You were kind. You said I was a work in progress. What do you think to this? Look at that. Hand-eye coordination, Andy.
Tell you what, can't fault you. Tremendous.
On a general note, how have you found as a business making the transition from face-to-face? We normally meet a couple of times a week for those work in progress workouts. And of course, that's now not possible with social distancing. I guess, like all businesses, it's been a journey, it's been an experience, it's been learning, and it's been tough.
Yeah, I mean, I think, obviously, as you know, I'm what's called prehistoric when it comes to technology. I write everything down in the diary. So that gives you some idea about how I work. It's been a steep learning curve, but obviously it's one that I've got to embrace. And I don't actually mind, to be honest. A lot of clients have taken the opportunity to work with me on Zoom and WhatsApp, and it seems to be going perfectly well. The only thing is that I'm sort of missing a little bit is the fact that as a trainer, I'm working with the kind of people that I work with, and also the exercises that I like to do, which I like to think I'm a little bit different, as in I do more sort of rehab and prehab work with people, that I am quite hands-on. So it's actually changing the way that I train, because you have to be more descriptive for the clients over the phone or over the computer screen, because you can't actually give them prompters. So, for instance, if you were teaching somebody those movements, you could actually stand behind them and put your hand on the scapula and help them to register what's moving and what isn't moving. So that side of it's a little bit harder because you do have to hope that the client is responding to how you describe the exercise and how it should feel. But apart from that, it's fine. It's just been a steep learning curve, just learning the technology, learning how the best way to do it. The sessions are slightly different because the range of equipment, if somebody comes to the gym, obviously they've got a wide range of equipment. I had a client yesterday who basically all she's got is a broom handle and a chair. That's a challenge to fill in a 45-minute session. But, we're doing it, and she's doing it twice a week with me, and she's enjoying it. So that's the main thing, and especially at these times as well. Obviously, you've been speaking to Penny. For the mental stimulus, about a lot of people aren't getting out like they used to. I think just having somebody coming into the house, whether it be through computer or phone, and showing them some exercises to do that are targeted for them, because that's the other difference. The classes I do or the sessions I do, they are targeted specifically for that client. So everybody can go online. There's thousands and thousands of classes online, PTs who download a 30-minute circuit. But realistically, that isn't designed for that particular person. And that's what people have got to be wary about, is they're doing things maybe that they've never done before, or it's a circuit that's not adapted to they maybe have a bad knee, bad back, bad shoulder, bad hip. When you're doing one-to-one with PTs, you would hope that the PT understood the client and worked around the client's needs, which you can do on a phone, just the same. So regarding going back to your first question about technology, I think it's very useful, and there is a lot of things you can do with it, and I'm sure it's the way that it's going to go more after this, hopefully 3-month period, and more PTs will find that they can do more online. But like I say, the negative side is if you're a PT who is hands-on, because I'm a sports massage therapist and biomechanics coach, they are the sort of things that really you can't do online. So I think if you can mix it, which hopefully after 3 months' time we will be able to, I think there's a place for both. It's been a steep learning curve, but I'm still learning. And I'm sure in another couple of weeks, with the help of yourself and a couple of other clients who are really good at this type of stuff, that I'll be flying. And then I can just stop paying my rent and work from home.
Ludlow's answer to Mr. Motivator. Andy Hackney of Pulse Health and Fitness, which reminds me I must go out for a run in this around the garden. And before Andy, we were hearing from clinical psychologist Dr. Penny Priest, between them with some fabulous advice on how to stay fit and healthy in mind and body during this rather strange period in all of our lives. That's pretty much it from this week's edition of the Owl Service. Just a quick look back to last week when we were talking to a cybersecurity expert. His name, Damien Walton from Interforensics, who was just talking about the potential risks of using platforms like Zoom in the workplace to keep in touch with clients and colleagues. And he made the point that Zoom is a lifeline. Other platforms are a lifeline to many businesses, particularly small and medium enterprises. And why would they want to cut that lifeline? Because of a smallish theoretical risk of somebody breaking in, gate crashing, if you like, their party. And in any case, he came up with some really good advice about how to set things up so that that was less likely in any case. But interestingly, since then, and today, in fact, I noticed that Zoom have brought out a fairly significant upgrade to the Zoom package. And Damien's advice, of course, the advice of any security expert is to make sure that you are running the very latest iteration of a software package. So I'll be installing that very shortly, for fear that otherwise somebody might crash in on our party. And you know, there is going to be a party. It is Dress Up Friday, to end where we started. No one has told me how to do this damn thing up, so it will just carry on dangling for the rest of Dress Up Friday. We have no jazzy graphics here on the Owl Service. This is the home office, and frankly, this is all we could stretch to. So I'll leave you with that thought. It is hashtag from this day forward, Dress Up Friday. Do your damnedest, do your smartest, and share your pictures on social with the hashtag Dress Up Friday. I'm looking forward to seeing them, girls and boys. Until next time, bye-bye.